What would you do if you could look inside yourself and truly understand who you are? And what if the truth about your being was so uncomfortable that the thought of facing it was unbearable? In a world where appearance and performance seem to matter more than authenticity, many wonder, why should we dare to confront the darkest aspects of our psyche? Wouldn't it be easier to continue living with our eyes turned outward, focusing on the expectations of others and the masks we wear to protect ourselves? The pain of self-knowledge is a theme that, at first glance, may seem paradoxical. After all, why would seeking the truth about ourselves be a source of suffering? If the truth sets us free, as philosophy proposes, then the process of confronting our own demons should be liberating, not distressing. However, reality is much more complex. Carl Jung, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, addressed this dilemma in a profound and revealing way, suggesting that self-knowledge is not an easy road to travel, but, paradoxically, it is the only path that leads us to true freedom. Jung believed that in order to achieve the wholeness of who we are, we need to integrate the hidden parts of our psyche, what he called the shadow. The shadow is composed of aspects of our personality that we reject or cannot accept, our fears, our repressed desires, the impulses that do not align with the idealized image we have of ourselves. These elements are there, within us, but we often avoid them at all costs. Jung asserted that ignoring them does not make them disappear, on the contrary, they take form in our lives in disguised ways, manifesting in unconscious behaviors and emotions that often surprise us. You have probably found yourself acting impulsively or feeling emotions you cannot control, without understanding why. This is a direct result of the presence of your shadow, which, when not recognized and integrated, takes control of your life. At the same time, this pain of self-knowledge, this confrontation with the darkest parts of our being, is the only path that leads to true freedom. Freedom is not the absence of pain, but the ability to live authentically, to be whole, without disguises. Jung does not give us an easy recipe for dealing with this. In fact, he challenges us to look within, to explore these dark corners, and to integrate them into our consciousness. This process requires courage because the pain of self-knowledge is real. But it is in this confrontation that true transformation resides. Are you ready to face your shadows? When you think about who you are, what comes to your mind? Perhaps the first image that arises is the one you want others to see, a balanced, successful, generous, capable person. But what if, for a moment, you set aside that mask and looked at the aspects of yourself that you usually avoid? What if you allowed yourself to recognize the flaws, the weaknesses, the unfulfilled desires, and even the selfish impulses you try to hide? This is where the true journey of self-knowledge begins, and it is also where the pain presents itself. Carl Jung, with his deep wisdom, believed that every human being has a shadow, a part of their psyche that contains the repressed or denied aspects of their personality. It is not simply a collection of bad behaviors or weaknesses, but rather everything that, for some reason, we cannot integrate into our image of who we are. The shadow can include feelings of anger, envy, jealousy, insecurities, and even desires for power or control. These are aspects that, out of fear of judgment or discomfort, we strive to hide, even from ourselves. The problem, however, is that this shadow does not disappear when ignored. It manifests in subtle and unexpected ways in our daily lives. Have you noticed how certain behavior patterns repeat themselves, even when you make an effort to change? Or how suddenly feelings of anger or sadness arise without explanation, often at moments when you would expect a different reaction? This happens because the shadow, when denied, begins to shape our reality in ways we cannot control. It appears in the projections we make onto others, in the snap judgments and criticisms we make without realizing, all fueled by our own inability to accept these aspects of ourselves. Jung proposed that the first step toward true freedom is to make this shadow conscious, bringing to light what has been repressed. But this is not an easy or comfortable process. Pain is present because it requires a deep acceptance of who we are, with all our imperfections. Instead of trying to hide the undesirable aspects of our psyche, we must embrace them, recognizing that they are part of us, just like our qualities. The shadow, when ignored, can be destructive, but when integrated, it becomes a source of wisdom and power. By facing this pain, you begin to realize that true freedom does not come from perfection, but from the full acceptance of who you are. This means being able to acknowledge your mistakes without judgment, to embrace your darkest desires without shame, and to understand that it is precisely this wholeness that makes you human. As Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." This is the invitation, for you to look within, to face your shadow, and to allow it to transform you. This is the path, the pain, but also the liberation. Have you ever wondered why so many of us live in search of external validation? Why do we fear being seen in our entirety, with all our flaws and virtues on display? Society undoubtedly plays a large part in this. We live in a world where perfection is celebrated, success is measured by appearance, and vulnerability is often seen as weakness. This creates a distortion of the internal reality of each of us, making us believe that we need to be something we are not in order to be accepted or loved. However, if you take a pause and reflect deeply, you may realize that this relentless pursuit for the approval of others never seems to fill the inner void. You run and run, but something inside you seems unable to find rest. This happens because we are disconnected from our truest essence. The pain of self-knowledge, as outlined by Jung, arises when we begin to realize that the key to this inner freedom does not lie in the external world, but rather within ourselves. Jung spoke about the concept of individuation, a lifelong process through which a human being becomes who they truly are, by integrating both their shadow and the conscious aspects of their psyche. Individuation is the process of becoming a whole, of uniting all parts of the self, even those we do not want to admit exist. But how does this integration happen? How can one truly accept the totality of who we are? The answer, though complex, begins with awareness. Awareness, for Jung, is the ability to perceive oneself at a deep level, beyond the images we construct and the masks we wear for the world. This does not just mean being conscious of our actions, but also of our thoughts, feelings, and deeper emotions. As we begin to look inward and accept what we once feared, the shadow loses its power to control us. But this requires courage. Courage to admit that we are, at the same time, the hero and the villain of our own story. You may be wondering how to start this process. The first answer is simple: begin to observe your reactions. When you feel angry or sad, ask yourself, what am I really feeling? Why am I reacting this way? By asking these questions, you begin to create space for self-observation, which will allow you to recognize patterns in your behavior, in your relationships, and even in your dreams. All of this is part of the work of integrating the shadow, accepting the parts of you that are still hidden in the shadows of the unconscious. And do not be fooled, this process is not linear. It will be filled with ups and downs, moments of doubt and moments of discovery. However, every time you confront your more difficult parts, you are getting closer to your true freedom. Because freedom is not an escape from pain, but the ability to live with it, accept it, and use it to grow. This awakening of consciousness can be the moment of greatest pain, but it will also be the most transformative of your life. Are you ready to begin this journey back to yourself? Have you ever stopped to think that, often, we avoid certain feelings, certain thoughts, certain behaviors, because we fear what they might mean about us? How many times have you felt guilty for being angry at someone or for having desires you consider improper? The shame that accompanies these feelings is a direct reflection of the unintegrated shadow, and as we avoid it, it grows in intensity, becoming a turbulent force that affects our lives in ways we do not always understand. Jung believed that the only way to master this internal storm was to confront it directly. There is no alternative path, no shortcuts. Facing our deepest emotions and thoughts requires a level of courage that few are willing to reach. The pain we feel when exploring these darker areas of our psyche is real, yes. But it is also revealing and liberating, for it is through this confrontation that we begin to realize that we are not defined solely by our mistakes, weaknesses, or dark aspects. We are made of all of this, yes, but also of our capacity to grow, learn, and change. The internal storm you feel when looking at these shadowy parts is not something to be feared. It is, in fact, a reflection of your psyche seeking balance. When you confront anger, envy, fear, and recognize that these feelings are part of who you are, you begin to break the cycle of self-rejection. This confrontation does not mean acting destructively or allowing these feelings to govern your actions. On the contrary, it means understanding their origin and transforming them into something productive. By integrating the shadow, you gain a new perspective on yourself. You begin to see that, instead of letting your flaws or imperfections consume you, you can use them to create a more authentic and balanced version of yourself. This does not mean you will become perfect or free of flaws, but that you will learn to deal with them consciously, rather than allowing them to take control of your life unconsciously. The key, then, is acceptance. Acceptance of pain, anger, sadness, shame, and even the most selfish desires. Not as a way to justify them, but as a first step toward healing. Because true freedom is not living without these emotions, but being able to feel them, understand them, and choose how to consciously react to them. This is the turning point where you begin to realize that suffering does not need to be the end, but the beginning of a profound transformation. Pain is not an obstacle, it is a bridge to a new way of being, more aligned with your true nature. And when you begin to understand this, you will notice that the internal storm starts to calm down, giving way to a peace that comes from the complete acceptance of yourself. Now, imagine what it would be like to live without the constant struggle against your own emotions and thoughts. Imagine being able to look at yourself and see not just the idealized person you want to be, but also the complex person, with your flaws and beauty, and still love yourself. That is the power of self-knowledge, the freedom that is only achieved when you allow yourself to be whole. Are you ready to face this storm and transform your pain into freedom? The moment has come for you to look inside once again and ask, who am I, really? You have already confronted the aspects of your shadow. You have felt the weight of the pain in facing your deepest emotions, your insecurities, your fears, and desires. But now, the question is, what will you do with this? Self-knowledge is not an end, but a continuous process. And true freedom arises not from the relentless pursuit of an idealized perfection, but from the full acceptance of who you are, with all your ups and downs. The path proposed by Carl Jung is not easy, and that is exactly why it is so transformative. He does not promise us a life without pain or suffering, but rather a life in which we can deal with these feelings with more clarity and authenticity. By integrating the shadow, by accepting the totality of what we are, we cease to be governed by what is repressed in our unconscious. And by doing so, we become freer. However, this freedom is not what many imagine. It is not a freedom from a perfect world where difficulties do not exist. On the contrary, it is the freedom to be at peace with internal chaos and external adversities. It is the freedom to be human, to be able to make mistakes and learn, to be able to embrace both light and shadow within you. You will no longer be trapped by the need to please others or by the shame of the aspects you do not wish to show. And by stopping hiding from yourself, you begin to live more authentically, without masks, without artifice. Imagine for a moment, what would it be like to live without the constant pressure to be something you are not? What would it be like to act according to your true essence, even if it means showing your vulnerabilities and weaknesses? This is the true freedom that Carl Jung invites us to seek, a freedom that does not come from denial, but from the acceptance of our totality. The transformation that occurs when you allow yourself to be authentic, by integrating your shadows, is immense. You begin to realize that when we accept our flaws, we are not diminishing our worth. On the contrary, we are strengthening ourselves, as we are capable of transcending these limitations. You do not need to be perfect. And when you accept this imperfection, you become stronger, more centered, more true. Self-knowledge is an endless journey, but as you progress, you begin to realize that the pain you felt along the way was necessary for your evolution. The pain of self-knowledge is not something to be avoided. It is a transformative pain, a pain that opens the doors to a new way of living, freer, deeper, and more connected to the inner truth. Now, I ask you, are you willing to continue in this process? Are you ready to look inside with courage, facing your shadows and, in doing so, discovering the freedom that can only come from the complete acceptance of who you are? The path ahead is yours to walk, but remember, the freedom you seek is not elsewhere, but within you.